And welcome back to A.R.'s Tales. I am A.R. Bala, and today is a very special episode. It is the first ever group cast, well, not ever in the universe, but first time that we're doing it. I am joined today by Steve R. Gans, Adam Gaffen, and Jahmil Effend. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Good.
Could not complain.
All right, so before we crack into it, for the people listening, where can people find you? Give your shout outs, company, websites, everything. What you got?
So the best place to find my stuff is my website, www.cassidychronicles.com. That's where you can find all the books. You can find sample chapters, playlists, and one of my characters has been taking over and doing posts every so often, so you don't want to miss that. She's got
Nice.
a unique voice.
Steve?
Nice. I like that. I would recommend my website, stevergans.com. We just put up the second book for sale and working on the third one. But I'm also on Facebook and Instagram.
Hey, and you can find me, Jahmil, at Inspired by Jahmil on Instagram, inspiredbyjahmil.com online. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Jahmil Effend, author. Give all the updates on the new release, War and the Fallows, out now on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles.
Hey, congratulations. Hey, and also drop the podcast. We got a fellow podcast host right here.
Oh yeah, and you got to check out Books by Authors podcast. Always up on Spotify and Apple and anywhere podcasts can be heard.
Damn right.
Cool.
All right, so cracking into it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of all your work, so it's kind of be something that I always wanted to kind of ask together as a group. But what do you guys feel is some of the best thriller entertainment that there's ever been? Like, as far as TV shows, as far as movies, like what to you defines the genre of thriller? Because I feel that's a through line that all of us can kind of relate to. Every book has that moment of that you're trying to go for the thriller aspect, that you're trying to get the heart racing to some aspect. So to you, what kind of defines that as the genre, as a moment, as a writing?
One for me, and it kind of crosses some lines, but one for me was the Andromeda Strain, because yeah, the whole book and the movie too. The movie was actually a good adaptation of the book, but it's building up and building up, and but it's building up so gradually. It's just he crafts it and he drops these tiny little details here and there, and looking back, it's like, oh, of course, but when you're in it, it's like, no, you no, can't figure it out. But that one, that's a good one for me.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good one. Crichton did a great job on that. And the film was worthy of the book. I totally agree on that.
Man, I need to. I've never even heard of that until right now. It's unreal how much content there is that
You're
great
young.
things can just go right under you.
You're young. And the slow build that Adam mentioned, it's becoming a lost art almost. Everyone has a short attention span. But I think, readers and viewers, if you hold their hand and walk them through the woods and they trust you, they will walk at your pace and you can control that. That's something I really struggled with both of my books. I write them, I try to be very tight, not to have any moments where the reader could breathe or relax, but that's something I'm trying to do a little bit with my third book, try to ease back a little bit and build more slowly. But yeah, Andromeda Strain's fantastic. There's so many good thrillers, and like you said, it crosses genres. Like if you ask Stephen King, are you a horror author? He says, no, I write suspense novels. And that's the common thread in all his stuff, whether it's horror or not. A good thriller that I've seen, well, my favorite of all time is Dario Argento's Deep Red, as far as films go. If I could write a book that good, as far as pacing and story, oh my God, I'd be happy. It's it's tough to narrow it down, because if you mention anybody, you're going to forget somebody else that's equally as good. Um, wow. But yeah, Crichton is great at it. King is great at it. There's so many. It's intimidating. It's why I didn't write a book for 40 years. How do you make a dent in that? How do you become a little weed growing up between those redwoods and get noticed?
Well, it's all about the
So
different
much more
voices,
stuff.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think a great example that kind of going off of what you were talking about, the slow burn, I think 2001 Space Odyssey.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think that's the slowest burn you can get, almost to a fault. Like but when it builds up, like when Hal is saying, is singing the Daisy song, Daisy. I mean, it's a robot singing, and you don't even know what to do with your emotions. You're like a gaseous blob at that point. It's such a good storytelling method, and then you just have the book that will stand on, and just like the whole lore of that whole idea that there was a monolith that came down, and that's basically what brought us from the apes until the Homo sapien that we are now, and then that same monolith will continue to evolve us later on, and then we go and visit it, like when we eventually have the capability of space flight. I mean, that whole concept was just insane.
Oh yeah, and now they would do it all in half an hour, and then the last hour would be all CGI, and oh god,
A huge
yeah,
a
you couldn't
huge
make that.
space battle.
You couldn't sell
Well,
that film to a major studio today. They wouldn't do it.
Not a
and
chance.
you got to wonder too how much of that, because 2001, if I remember right, the original story was Clark. It was only a short story.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Sentinel.
So, right, the Sentinel, and Kubrick. So, how much of 2001 is Clark, and how much of 2001 is Kubrick?
Oof.
Because you look at Kubrick's work, and he's got some amazing stuff. Just look at Clockwork Orange.
Yeah,
The
You
Shining.
know, yep.
Eyes Wide Shut. My God.
yeah,
So even Doctor Strangelove. If you want to go back,
yeah. Paths of Glory. Yeah,
so so where did the line cross? And I know the two of them talked. I know the two of them worked together on it. So again, where where is it Clark? Where is it Kubrick? Where is it both? The the only people who know are Clark and Kubrick, and they're not saying anything because, well, they're dead.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's Lennon McCartney who can draw the line.
Yep.
You know that Stephen Hawking has a IQ of 170, and Kubrick had an IQ of 210. So one discovered Hawking radiation for black holes with 170, and another one made movies with 210. What type of movies do you think this animal was making? Like, imagine the scope of things that we it just goes over our head. I always like to make fun of like the art class analogy where you have like a teacher that's like, oh, like this color blue obviously represents the virginity of man and and all these crazy things. It's like, oh, but maybe the artist like blue. But I really think with Kubrick, it really was everything absolutely intentional, down to the shoelaces. I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like in 50, 100 years, there's going to be people that can just like the same way they carbon dated the Mona Lisa and they found out it was a painting within a painting. I feel like Kubrick, somehow someone's going to do it with Kubrick and be like, oh, wait a minute. There was nuclear launch codes in there the entire time. That bastard, how do you do it?
Yeah,
If you,
he poured over every detail for sure.
Jahmil, sorry, I don't think we've been letting you get a word in. What was the
Nah, it's I was gonna actually say Get Out, to be honest. Jordan Peele's Get Out.
how can
Man.
I forget
That
that, man?
that was, for me, when you talk about intentionality and someone spending time on every frame, like, I think what he was doing with that was just impressive overall. He spent so much time being deliberate about the messages and the suspense he builds throughout the story of you trying to figure out what the world is, what is going on, up until that moment where it's finally revealed, where even the ending, the crazy moment when the cop car pulls up, you see the lights, and you're like, this guy is it holds you to that very last moment, just being like such a great story. So I'm just gonna say Get Out.
You know what is my favorite scene in that movie? When they're at the picnic and they're like, he's at first realizing that it's a little weird. And then he sees the guy that he could have sworn was like in the missing poster. So he goes and talks to him, and the guy is just like, they're kind of like, nah, I don't know what you're talking about. And then all of a sudden, he says something that makes him like remember, and his like nose starts bleeding. And that's when he
Oof.
does like the get out. And like, oh my God, it was just like the perfect like I mean, think about the scene. It's a beautiful picnic. I don't know the country they're in, but it looks like a type of a Georgia country. You know what I mean? Just like beautiful plains and like beautiful landscapes and whatnot. Big old yards with huge of acres and a beautiful house. And they're in this beautiful picnic, and then it just turns like that. And then the point when everyone leaves and they have the silent auction. I mean,
Oh,
oh my God. And
yeah,
then when
it's
they find the
impressive.
bunker under the house, that was actually a great example. Oh,
Yeah, even when
Jesus.
he finds the box of pictures of his girlfriend with all these other people, and you're like, whoa, this is it. This is like this has been going on for so much longer.
And that
You
one
see how
black
much
girl,
they.
and oh,
Oh yeah,
Good stuff.
oh, oh man. Now, going off of that question, I don't know if everyone has seen it. I'm assuming I'm assuming Steve has, but have you seen Us, the spiritual sequel of Get Out?
yes.
I
Now,
haven't seen that.
No.
well, damn, I guess I can't dwell on it too much, but
No, go for it.
I was gonna ask to you, especially with how amazing Get Out was. What do you think was that made Us? Now, first of all, do you think Us was a slightly less of a movie than Get Out?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I agree as well. Now, what do you think made it that? Because you have, it's actually what Adam was saying. It's like, what was the source material and what was the director? I mean, if you look at source material and director, it was by the same person. So it makes you question, how did he go from here to here? Same mind, same genius level of honestly, I will say, Get Us was beautifully shot. The cinematography definitely honestly increased from Get Out, but just everything else was the same person. What do you think? How did that fumble happen from your point of
I,
view?
I think most of it came from the setup. I think Get Out took a longer time before you reach that climax of like realizing what the world was, realizing that he was trapped and he was stuck, and then they spent less time with him stuck. So by the time you finally realize what's going on, I think it's the last 20-25 minutes of the film where they really resolve the issue, and all of that stuff happens. But with Us, the one thing I realized, like one thing I noticed, was that it was so fast. Like you get introduced, you get all of those pieces, and then before you know it, you have the second clones of them already there, and you spend about half the movie with this weird situation, and not much is coming to fruition. So it's just not as it wasn't as entertaining because you just got there so quickly that the climax was reached halfway through the movie. And anytime you have a movie where the peak is midway, you're gonna have a long fall. And I think that movie, even the resolution wasn't as entertaining as it could have been if the movie's runtime was 30 minutes shorter.
No doubt. And just to pull Adam and Steve into the conversation, the the setup for that movie, I remember when the trailers came out, and the trailers I feel like came out like 2 years before the release. It was one of the most amped up movies, or the most amped up movie that I ever got for, because the trailer was unbelievable. The whole plot, the whole setup of the movie was that it was the reality that there's a whole bunch of bunkers all across America with and tunnels and like huge systems underground that we have no idea what they're used for. They're empty. People can go excavating in them at any time. I'm sure you've seen YouTube videos of it and whatnot. And then they just kind of play on the idea of like, imagine if there's a whole other thing going down on there that is like trying to mess with you. And that whole concept, I mean, to me, it's what horror is. And kind of like segueing into the next topic of like what horror is. The horror to me is like a concept. You know what I mean? Like the concept that there could be an underground people. There could be people literally under 150 feet below your feet, that are just, doing some evil supervillain Lex Luthor shit and you have no idea about it. That's a genius concept because it's one that it's middled a little bit in reality. So like, that's where the horror comes from. It's the idea that maybe this could be a thing. I talked about it before with the whole concept of Freddy. What scares you about Freddy isn't necessarily the claws. It's the idea that he can come to you in your dreams when you're sleeping. That he can attack you when in your safe space. And I remember the after Freddy is basically when that whole middle school logic of like, oh, if you die in your dreams, you're dying for real came out. Like that's how much it affected like psychology to like even little kids. Just like that, a little fear, just a little thought that can make you think like, oh, maybe that's real. You know? So
So, sorry, I don't mean to uh,
no, no,
interrupt,
no.
but uh, to me, horror always represents on some level the fear of the society at the time. So
Mhm.
right now, not knowing what's going on, look at us. We're bombarded by information all the time. We are swimming in information. We want to know everything. I mean, how many rabbit holes do you go down when you're online? I have to go online all the time to do some research for the next book because I don't keep all this quantum physics in my head. It's not something I ever studied, so I've got to find bits and pieces of it. So I go online, and dive down a rabbit hole. Um, but we're swimming in information. So what is the opposite of information? Not knowing. So the fear, the fear of us is the not knowing. Think, uh, Steve, think back to the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 78 remake and the original
Mhm.
one back in the 50s.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the conformity, the
Mhm.
fear of conformity,
Yeah.
it was playing against the fear of the Soviets.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um,
So horror always reflects whatever society is afraid of. Freddy in the 80s, okay, everything is go, 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 go. You got to work, you got to hustle, you got to strive. You can't take any time off. You can't fall asleep. You can't fall behind. There's Freddy. As soon as you fall asleep, as soon as you take that break, oh, you're done. Bye bye.
Damn.
oh yeah. And with the 50s, with the fear of nuclear war, is where you got all the atomic radiation monsters.
Godzilla.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it reflects the fear of the times. The 80s were big on slashers because that's when most people, the kind of the serial killer craze happened in pop culture. There were serial killers before that, but that's kind of when it became a thing where every bookstore you went into, there's the true crime section was huge. It wasn't just In Cold Blood and The Onion Field and Helter Skelter anymore. Everybody had a story about this Norman Bates kind of character who is killing people for years and getting away with it. And that's why Psycho changed the whole genre of horror films. Who's scarier than the guy in the mirror? Um, yeah, and now it's come full circle to where you have Dexter, where you have a good guy serial killer. Everything gets watered down and becomes a parody of itself if you're not careful. And now with 10, 15 years ago, the big thing in horror was torture porn. Because we were seeing people tortured to death and beheaded on the news and stuff like that. Now it's kind of weird. Zombies are so overdone. I'm a huge George Romero fan, and was lucky enough to talk to him for about 45 minutes, 20 some years ago. But I'm so ready to never see anything zombie related ever again. It's just it's played out, at least for a while. It needs to go away. And I think you're seeing now you're seeing a resurgence of supernatural type horrors. It's all over television, all these paranormal ghost investigation shows and shows like The Unexplained, where they're talking about Bigfoot and Mothman and all this. So there's the supernatural stuff has come back. And you've also got what's in the news, conspiracy theories. Like you said, the flood of information. It doesn't take anything to set up a website and make it look plausible and cherry pick some information that might support some harebrained conspiracy that you want to push and get people to believe it. It's like opening a church. If you come up with a good story and open a church, you might only have 20, 30 followers, but they'll follow you to the end. You know, and when the comet comes, you'll all put on the shoes and drink the Kool-Aid and you'll all be gone.
Yeah.
People
Dance.
are desperate for meaning, and the state of our society at this point, they're looking for it everywhere, and they don't have to go to the library to look at books. It's in their hand. They can look up anything, and that's what's good and bad about all that information that's out there, like you said. So that's where all the conspiracy theories come in, and Get Out feeds into that. You know, that's a conspiracy theory. I can't prove that there aren't tunnels and bunkers and all this going on, so maybe it is. I mean, you get the right kind of person, and you could sell that to them as something legitimate, and you get enough people to make some money doing it. So that's where things are now. We're kind of adrift, I think, as a society, and the films reflect that. And the books do too.
Man, I can't say how much you just shifted my opinion on that, honestly. That is,
On what?
well, like, it's 100% true. Like, exactly what Adam was saying and what you said on tangent to that. Horror really is more derivative of the time period. I remember one of my favorite classes in college was actually an art and technology class that it kind of, which was an elective. And what the class did was kind of explain, or try to explain, how art and technology actually intertwine with one another, which was kind of interesting from an engineering school point of view, because they would basically say, and like with like real like technology advancements to prove it, how much sci-fi actually inspired the technology, and how it basically was cyclical. Like, the technology at the time is what inspired the people to think of this crazy whatever the heck, and then 50 years later, the scientists and the engineers that read that as a kid made that when they were older, and then it was just a cyclical kind of like event. And one of my favorite tangents of that, when they were talking about that, specifically, that almost the sci-fi genres itself didn't really pick up until the Challenger bombings, until the Hiroshima, until the whole atomic age and everything like that. Because it was what you said, it was the kind of like the real beginnings of people understanding like what humans can do. Like, this technology that we're making isn't just stuff that makes our life nicer. It could actually have a real impact on life, and like really cause unforeseen actions and deaths, and we can really mess around with things. And from that point on, and again, I'm not saying that that's what started the sci-fi era, but from that point on, you can see a quick upturn in that type of genre into the dystopian thing. So it was like that idea of horror, of like knowing that, oh, you know what, maybe we could mess around and do some unforetold shit. The conspiracy theories and all those things is kind of what added to the genre.
Yeah.
I'm and I'm not disagreeing with you, but one of the reasons that I like sci-fi, and I write sci-fi, is because it comes from the most positive place. Because for sci-fi, no matter how miserable the future is, I mean, think of Blade Runner, or any dystopian apocalyptic sci-fi, but it always comes from a place that there is a future. There is something coming. There's something that's going to happen. It's not just here and now. So if you look back to what is called the golden age of sci-fi, which is about the 30s into the 40s, and the pulp magazines, Amazing Science Fiction, Astounding, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. That's coming out of the Great Depression, out of the worst economic downturn, that in recent history. And so people are they're looking for hope. They're looking for something better. They're looking for something, okay, it's not going to be wait on the corner to get my 5-cent loaf of bread, which may or may not be sold out, or I might not even have 5 cents. They're trying to look past that. So, and then yes, absolutely, sci-fi does incorporate a lot of the fears, you know, um, a lot of the fears of society as well. In that it's similar to horror. The first robot movie, RUR, the faceless worker taking over for people. You know, uh, that goes back 100 years. Um,
Metropolis.
Metropolis, yep. Uh,
THX.
uh,
Not so
to a degree,
much.
Wait, am I thinking
yeah.
about the right movie?
THX 1138 is not. It's not as. I think Lucas did that mainly because he wanted to. I don't think it.
Am I thinking
It
about the
was a
right movie?
project. It was a passion project for him, not a. I think this is going to make me $1 million, unlike American Graffiti. Um,
Mm.
so, but sci-fi, the best of it can look to the future and look at the problems of the future and say, okay, this is what we might be running up against. How do we solve it? How do we not get to that place?
Yeah, it's always
Mm.
optimistic. You're right. I mean, look at Star Trek, the original series. I mean, the Klingons are clearly the Soviets, but you've got an interracial cast and you've got a more impressive and diverse and progressive view of the future. That's probably why Star Trek isn't so big among kids now as something like Star Wars or something more dystopian, because kids don't have a whole lot of hope for the future generally, and older people my age, most of them don't at all. Um, but yeah, that's sci-fi looks to the best and horror looks to the worst. I think I mentioned Godzilla before. The first Godzilla film is a horror film. It's not sci-fi at all or
Oh no,
fantasy.
no.
Ishiro Honda was a young guy, and it wasn't 9 years after the bombs dropped, and he sincerely believed when he made this guy in a rubber suit film that once people saw this film, that atomic testing would stop worldwide because people would realize what could happen, and we all know how that turned out. But it's a horror film.
Well, and he wasn't far wrong. I mean, the test ban treaty went into effect 9 years later.
Yeah, but
So it was part of a movement,
yeah,
and it
exactly.
was a very visible part of a movement.
Oh yeah, definitely. You mentioned, before I forget, and we need to get Jamel in here. Um, but you mentioned Body Snatchers. The second remake, I liked the Donald Sutherland '78 remake. The one
Mhm.
they did in 1990 is forgettable. I don't know if you even remember seeing it,
I actually do.
but there's
Um,
one great thing about that film, um, that AR and Jamel and anybody else might want to check out. The trailer for the 1990 version, which was just called Body Snatchers, uh, is 30 seconds of Meg Tilly just talking to the camera, and it's the creepiest film trailer you will ever see. And it's not even really what she says, it's how she says it. If you want to see a master class in how to make a film trailer and get people to go to the theater to see a very substandard remake, watch the trailer for the 1990 Body Snatchers on YouTube. Great trailer. They should have just released the trailer and then never wasted money making the film.
Damn. There was something that you said that really stuck out to me. It was the idea that youth are leaning more towards the dystopian because they have less of a hopeful outlook for the future. Now, can you expand on that a little bit?
In the 60s, you had the youth counterculture movement, and most people who were either part of that movement or sympathized with it. Like my parents, who were very middle of the road, who were like, yeah, those young people are right, but they really shouldn't be throwing rocks at the police and taking drugs. Those kinds of, a lot of people were behind them. They just didn't approve of their methods. But Star Trek, the original show, reflects that optimism that, we can make a better future for everybody, not just white people. And there was hope. The space program, what's more optimistic than the space program of the 60s? And with all the turmoil and backlash from the establishment against all of that, and how badly it all ended in the late 60s, early 70s, and then everything just became the me generation. And all the old hippies became yuppies in the 80s. Um, you had a sense of optimism about the future. I was born in 66. This was still in the air when I was a kid. It had become a bit cynical because of the Chicago 7 trial and things like that, but it was still lingering there. It's like, we can make a better future. The future is going to be better for everybody. And I actually think it is. But I don't, when I talk to younger people today, people of your generation, I don't, if I were to ask them, you know, do you think everything's going to be better in 10 or 20 years than it is now? A lot of them believe so and are working for it, and bless them for doing that. Revolution is a young man's game, but the overall feeling is cynicism. And if you get to people above 30, and God forbid into my generation, everything's going to hell according to them. Everything's getting worse, you know. But old people always do that. They did that in the 60s. Everything's falling apart. No, it's changing. It's not falling apart. You know, it might be the end times for you, but it's not for everybody. But I don't think there's that sense of optimism. I think if the average young person, if you ask them, you think the future is going to be more like Star Trek or Mad Max? I think we all know which one they'd probably pick. And it's hard to argue with them. But
Well, and
you don't get that optimism.
And that gets reflected in the current Star Trek franchises.
Yeah.
Discovery is, I mean, I've only watched half of one season of Discovery, and I like it. I enjoy it, but it's dark.
Yeah. Well, if it wasn't, they wouldn't have put it on the air. If they tried anything as optimistic as the original series, no one would have put that on the air.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say that, like, so much more media, even reading dark fantasy, grim dark. There's a whole wave now of young people who enjoy just seeing the gray in humanity versus the optimism. And I think a lot of people, even if you just watch shows and TV and television that has been produced in the last 10 years, so much of the big stuff has just been dark. It has really touched on those gray characters, or morally gray characters, which is something I notice in fantasy now. It's a huge staple for so many writers. So everyone's morally gray. No one's the good guy anymore, because the good guy Harry Potter character can't really exist in today's society because we don't believe it. It almost feels unreal to think someone could be so optimistic or so positive in our stories. So now we all look for those protagonists that are dark and have those hidden secrets that make them more interesting. And I think that's why Game of Thrones became so popular in 2010 when they started making shows. I think that's why you get to see franchises like House of Cards, a very, very dark look at politics, become something super relevant, and so many people fell in love with it because it was a dark view. It wasn't West Wing or whatever that show used to be. There's all of those different aspects come into play now, and I think you touch on it a little bit. Like, this generation of people really kind of err on the side of darkness.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna need to put a pin on that because this thing is about to reset. So I'm gonna send. Basically, we're gonna go for part 2. It's gonna be the end of part 1. We're about to do part 2, but we are 100% gonna continue on that fantasy tip. I've been waiting to switch over to it. You gave the perfect segue. I'm telling you, you are the man. We will be back. Steve Gans, Adam Gaffen, Jahmil Effend, come back. You can consider this a commercial break.